Hi, hello, and welcome back to the HII Method. My name is Jen Hatz. I am the host of the HII Method podcast and also the founder of the HII Method, a holistic, integrative, and innovative approach to assessing and optimizing human health, well-being, and performance. And I'm partnered with Neuroforce One, a human performance company that has been training champions for years. And they offer training and assessments in their facility, as well as remote options available. And we are going to answer the big question that I think everyone loves to ask this question, and not everyone loves to have to give an answer to this question. And it is, what diet is the best one to follow? Or what diet should I follow? What diet is best? Any question related to tell me just how to eat and I'll do it kind of thing, right? And it's all specific to diets. Everyone loves to look at whatever the trending diets are, especially because, someone somewhere tells you about, oh, I'm following this diet and I got all these great results. Or, oh, I did that diet and it didn't work for me. And everybody has their own perspective, their own experience with all these different ways of eating. And it all centers around different diets that tend to be whatever the trendy diet is. So as a dietitian, it's one of those questions that I always get, and it's a love-hate relationship with this question because there isn't really an answer that I can give, but there is a really long, extensive explanation that I can give, and that's what I'm going to give right here. So just to give that big, big, I guess, conclusion before we even start, the fact that what is the best diet to follow? Well, it's the diet that you can follow. And what that means is it's the dietary intake, the dietary pattern, the overall lifestyle that you can maintain for the long term, because that is what is going to ultimately promote your health, both acute and chronic. And that's going to be probably the most sustainable for you to maintain because you're proving it over time that you're maintaining it, that you're able to maintain this type of eating pattern, this type of lifestyle, these type of decisions, that you're shifting your views around food, and it's in a way that is helping to promote your health. Now, what this looks like for people, so this is actually going to get kind of funny here when I explain this. It's individualized to everyone. Everyone's going to have their own individual needs and preferences and different factors that are at play, yet it's also extremely similar across the board. And so what I mean by that is that the best diet to follow is going to meet these criteria, if you want to think of it like this. It's going to meet the appropriate amount of calories for you, for what you need, based on your goals right now, based on your activity level, and based on what your health functions best with, if that makes sense. Now, why I say that is because the amount of calories that you take in, like say the amount of calories that you have measured and portioned out on your plate, may not always be the amount of calories that you're fully absorbing within you, depending on the state of your gut health. So there's kind of this natural wiggle room that you have to allow yourself to have with your calories that you are, we'll say, prioritizing or looking towards or trying to control or measure in some way, because the reality is calories, it's all an estimate based on equations, but it's not necessarily specific to your physiology and how you are operating right now in this moment. And even our ability to estimate how many calories you need in order to maintain your functioning, in order to gain lean body mass or lose body fat, these are all estimates. They're not specific enough for us to know truly what you need right now based on how your physiology is operating. So any change in your core temperature, any change in your health, any change in the temperature and the circumstances around you, your activity level, these all change, especially your stress levels. These are all going to change how your body is physiologically operating, and therefore how many calories it's going to require in order to promote some sort of, if we're talking about performance, some sort of benefit in performance, some sort of a more full and efficient recovery. Anything that you're looking for, those calories may be a little more than you may have anticipated, or even a little less. So there needs to be a little bit more, we'll say, flexibility around our calorie goals, but that's still going to be the number one thing, that you're eating calories, amount of calories that you require for your physiology personally, not just because you wanted to follow a meal plan that was set at a certain number of calories. That doesn't, your body doesn't care about that. Which then goes into the next thing about calories. So then it's not just calories, but it's also how those calories are distributed out across different macronutrients. And so meeting certain, we'll say, requirements for macronutrients based on what your needs are, that's going to start to paint a picture of the types of foods that you're including in your diet. Now, across the board, everyone has roughly similar macronutrient needs that might sting some people who really want to stay true to a certain type of eating style that maybe heavily restricts a certain macronutrient. Like if you're really, keto, low carb type, and you really believe heavily in restricting that, I'm sorry to say, but most people, I would say everyone really, your ranges of what you need from a macronutrient really are very similar to other people. You're not necessarily going to gain a benefit from going to extremes within your macronutrient needs. It's just quite honestly what your body needs, what your physiology needs. So you're only doing yourself a benefit by following along with those more typical standard recommendations that are being put out there for the population for your macronutrient needs and your calorie needs. Now, all that being said, so like I said, as you start to identify what your macronutrient needs are and your calorie needs, that starts to kind of section off different foods or different types of foods into, different categories of what you would be looking at and the amounts that you would be looking at. So now your diet is starting to just shape itself based on just your calories and macronutrients. Now you start to add in the added layers of what is culturally competent, what is something that is socially reflective of what it is that you are aiming for really in an overall life experience. What is something that is also specifically within your budget? And you feel like you can very strongly rely on this way of eating because there is no way in I was going to say, okay, there is no possible way that your budget would ever interfere with you being able to continue eating this way, because it's built in a way, it's put together in a way that's meeting your budget needs. That does not mean that you are spending excessive amounts on certain foods because you're now telling yourself that you have to prioritize these foods. That's not the answer. What is the answer is that you are identifying what types of foods can provide these nutrients for you in the most cost-effective way. That's the answer. So I think that's probably a big secret that doesn't get put out there enough about what it means to, we'll say, budget for your health when it comes to how you're choosing different foods to eat and what you should be eating. So otherwise, if you're hitting those calories, your macronutrients, now you're finding foods that are culturally relevant to you, that are more, within your social like sphere, we'll say, things that you can go out with friends and have these foods, and it's part of just, your overall life experience, and that is very specific to a budget that is 100% that you can maintain, because the cost of food, first of all, is very subject to change based on inflation and based on supply and demand, based on if there's any sort of a food recall, for instance, or something. So you need to really zero in on all these different things. But then what ends up happening, and this is what I said was so funny, that everyone who has these very individual needs, your diets end up looking pretty similar enough that, it's pretty predictable that we can go into a grocery store and find pretty much the majority, if not all, the foods that we would typically eat. And so that's that kind of both that, like, well, we're eating what's being put out there, but also what's being put out there is basically what we need to be eating anyway. So hopefully that helps to zero down. But so if there is one big takeaway that I have to give of like a certain type of diet to follow that would be best for you, after you're factoring all of that in, the biggest thing too, and actually I didn't mention this earlier, when I'm talking about macronutrients before, what I didn't mention is the impact of fiber. So this is going to be the big difference maker, because a lot of diets that are out there, a lot of the trending diets, don't factor this in enough. And I'm going to make like a big, point about this really for probably forever, about the importance of that fiber content of the foods and out of your overall calories and macronutrients that you're taking in. Because the fiber content of your foods is going to dictate what types of foods you are choosing. So if you have, let's say, certain macronutrient goals that you're aiming for each day, and now you add fiber to those macronutrients. So when I'm talking about macronutrients, I'm talking about carbohydrates, protein, and fat. And now we're going to add fiber as a fourth that we're tracking and wanting to make sure that we're hitting this goal each day. Once you factor in fiber, now the foods that you're selecting that are going to provide you with however much macronutrient in whatever,
however much of the macronutrients and whatever portion sizing. Now that food choice is likely going to change because you have to factor in fiber now. And because of that, because fiber is getting factored in now, the entire kind of makeup of what it is that you're taking in ends up looking maybe different from what a trending diet would look like, but it also ends up looking a very certain way. And what I mean by that is, more often than not, you're going to find that you are eating, just by default, by following those recommendations, that you are eating a largely plant-based diet that is quote-unquote flexitarian. So what I mean by that, if I just gave you some trend terms right there that you could probably look up. So what I mean by that is that the plant-based diet means that the majority of the foods you're eating are coming from plant foods. And that should be the case when you are meeting your carbohydrate needs and your fiber needs. That means that a majority of the foods you're taking in should be high fiber carbohydrates in order to meet those goals, which means that the majority of the food you're taking in is coming from plants. Now, having that, like I said, the flexitarian, so that means you're also adding in a little bit of some animal-based protein foods. And that's going to help to provide some of the protein and fiber, or some of the protein and fat content that is needed to fill out your plate, basically. But the big distinction here is that the way that your meal, the way that your food, the way that your diet is proportioned, it's going to end up looking, like I said, like a more plant-based diet with just a little bit of a flexitarian touch, where you just have just enough, just a little bit of those animal-based protein foods to kind of round out your needs. And by doing this, but if everyone did this, oh my goodness. First of all, everyone would be in phenomenal health. I can just say that right now. But then this would be the most sustainable eating practice, the most sustainable diet, really, for our overall environmental health too. So this type of approach it ends up being, if you want to think of it like the tried and true like dietary pattern that we should be following, except I don't want to put a label on it because everybody loves putting labels on it. Instead, this ends up being the no label situation. It's basically the situationship of diets. Like, we don't need a label for it. So, but it is still going to provide you with what you need, and really what ends up benefiting you, and across the board, everyone ends up benefiting from this. It just doesn't have a label on it. But if you do want to use those kind of trendy search terms, you can start to kind of get the gears going with a plant-based diet with just a little bit of a flexitarian touch. Otherwise, we can keep it between us that it's just the situationship of diets, really. Drop a comment if you gained enough information from that to be able to make some good choices. Otherwise, if there's anything else that you wanted to know, stay tuned because I have far more episodes coming up for you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.